My husband's family sent me 3 PowerPoints explaining why his mistress should replace me. My sister-in-law handed me an official notice saying I had been demoted from family member to brother's legal spouse. My husband's mistress had been promoted to sister-in-law primary. She would receive the matching Christmas pajamas, preferred seating at family dinners, and priority placement in family photographs. I would still be invited to selected events. That should have been the most humiliating document anyone in my husband's family could create. It was. A week later, my mother-in-law sent me a PowerPoint explaining why I should move into the guest house so my husband's mistress and her children could live in my home. Then my husband presented his own proposal. His plan was for all of us to live together. He would rotate bedrooms. And whenever there was a disagreement, his conflict resolution flowchart ended with the same solution. Sarah concedes. He had prepared for every possible reaction except the one I eventually gave him. I left the marriage. And I kept the house. Welcome back, everyone. Today's episode is one family disaster told through 3 increasingly unhinged documents. It begins with a demotion, moves into a property takeover, and ends with a husband trying to turn adultery into a household management system. Let's get into it. Part 1: The Sister-in-Law Role Reassignment. My name is Sarah, I'm 35. My husband Mark is 38. At the beginning of this story, we had been married for 9 years. We had 2 children together, Lily, who was 8, and Owen, who was 5. Mark worked as a regional operations manager. That detail matters because Mark communicated almost entirely through business language. He did not argue, he identified misalignment. He did not apologize, he acknowledged an opportunity for improvement. He did not lie, he managed information according to relevance. His younger sister, Megan, worked in human resources and spoke exactly the same way. Their mother, Patricia, had spent 20 years running a nonprofit organization and treated every family gathering like a board meeting. They loved agendas, action items, and follow-up emails. For years I found it funny. Then Mark used that language to hide an 18-month affair. Claire had worked in another department at his company. She was 32 and had a 7-year-old son named Noah from a previous relationship. She also had a 10-month-old daughter named Ava. Ava was Mark's daughter. I found out because Claire contacted me directly. Mark had apparently been promising her for months that he was going to leave me. Whenever she asked when, he told her that I was emotionally unstable and that he had to manage the transition carefully. Claire eventually realized there was no transition. Mark was coming home every night, sleeping beside me and planning our summer vacation while telling her that our marriage had already ended. She sent me screenshots. There were hundreds. Hotel reservations. Photos. Messages about Ava's appointments. Discussions about where Claire and the children would eventually live. Mark had even taken a DNA test after Ava was born. He knew she was his daughter. He had known for months. I had spent those same months asking why money kept disappearing from our joint account. Mark said household expenses had increased. Technically, he was right. I just didn't know he was supporting a second household. When I confronted him, he did not deny anything. Instead, he sat at our kitchen table and told me that the situation was more nuanced than the messages suggested. I asked him which part required nuance. The affair. The secret child. The money. Or the fact that his entire family already knew. That was the part that broke me. His mother and sister had known about Ava for almost 4 months. Patricia had visited Claire's apartment. Megan had bought Ava a bracelet engraved with the words, "Auntie loves you." They had held my husband's child with another woman and then sat across from me at Easter dinner asking whether Lily still wanted a bicycle for her birthday. Mark moved into his mother's house that night. I did not immediately file for divorce. That is the part people may judge me for. I wanted time to think. Our children loved their father, our lives were deeply connected. I was angry, humiliated, and terrified of making permanent decisions while I could barely sleep. Mark kept saying he wanted to save our marriage. He insisted the affair was over. He said he would support Ava financially but maintain appropriate boundaries with Claire. I didn't believe him. But I also wasn't ready to accept that 9 years of marriage had disappeared in a single evening. 2 weeks after the discovery, Patricia invited me to Sunday lunch. She said the children missed their cousins and that everyone needed to begin healing. I almost declined. Then Lily asked whether she could see her grandmother. I told myself I could tolerate 2 hours. When we arrived, Mark was not there. Claire was not there either. It was Patricia, Megan's husband, and their 2 children. Lunch was tense but civil. Nobody mentioned the affair. Nobody mentioned Ava. Then, after dessert, Megan disappeared into the home office and returned holding a cream-colored envelope. My full name was printed on the front. She placed it beside my plate. I asked what it was. She smiled and said, "It's just something to help clarify everyone's position going forward." Inside was a 3-page document titled, Sister-in-law Role Reassignment. I thought it was a joke. The first page had an organizational chart. At the top were Patricia and her late husband labeled Founding Family Leadership. Below them were Mark and Megan. Under Mark's name were 2 boxes. The first said, CLARE Sister-in-law Primary. The second said, Sarah Brothers Legal Spouse. I looked at Megan. She was watching me carefully, like an HR manager waiting for an employee to react to a performance warning. I asked, "What is this?" She said, "It's not meant to hurt you." That sentence has never once been followed by anything kind. I kept reading. Claire as sister-in-law primary would receive priority inclusion in family traditions. First consideration for coordinated clothing. Direct access to the family group chat. Preferred seating beside Mark at informal gatherings. Inclusion in photographs involving Ava. Participation in holiday planning. My revised role included continued recognition as Mark's legal wife. Attendance at events involving Lily and Owen. Separate communication regarding the children. Optional inclusion in extended family photographs. No expectation of matching clothing. The final page said the arrangement would be reviewed after 6 months based on cooperation, family cohesion, and emotional maturity. I asked Megan whether Mark had approved it. She hesitated. That was enough. I asked again. She said Mark had not approved the final wording, but he agreed that Claire needed to be recognized as part of the family because Ava was innocent. I said Ava was innocent. Claire's son was innocent. My children were innocent. The adults who had spent months lying to me were not. Megan sighed. Then she told me I was focusing too heavily on blame. She said Claire had shown remarkable grace by accepting that Mark still needed time before leaving our marriage. I said he told me he wanted to save our marriage. Megan gave me the kind of look people give when they think a child has misunderstood something obvious. She said, Sarah, he wants to preserve the family. That doesn't necessarily mean returning to the old structure. The old structure. That was what she called my marriage. I asked her what the matching clothing section meant. She looked embarrassed for the first time. Their family bought matching pajamas every Christmas. Apparently, Megan had already ordered Claire a set. She claimed there was not enough inventory left in my size. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. My husband had cheated on me, fathered a child, lied for 18 months, spent our money supporting another woman, and somehow the detail that finally made the entire situation feel absurd was a shortage of plaid pajamas. Megan asked why I was laughing. I folded the document, placed it back in the envelope, and stood up. I called Lily and Owen. Patricia followed me into the hallway. She said leaving would upset the children. I told her the children were already upset, they just didn't understand why. Megan said I was proving why the role clarification had been necessary. I turned around and said, you can promote Claire to whatever imaginary position you want. You cannot demote me inside my own marriage. Mark already did enough of that. Then we left. That evening, Megan sent me an email. The subject line was, Follow-up role clarification discussion. She wrote that she regretted my emotional response but remained committed to building a family environment where all children felt accepted. I replied with one sentence. Please direct all future organizational changes through my divorce attorney. I did not have a divorce attorney yet, but I found one the next morning. And honestly, handing someone a document saying she has been demoted to brother's legal spouse is an incredible way to help her overcome indecision. Megan probably thought she was helping Mark manage a difficult situation. Instead, she managed Sarah directly into a lawyer's office. But the sister-in-law's memo was only the beginning. Because 1 week later, Sarah received an actual PowerPoint presentation from her mother-in-law. Part 2, the family reorganization proposal. The house Mark and I lived in was mine. I had purchased it 2 years before I met him, using money I inherited from my grandfather. The deed was in my name. Mark had contributed to household expenses during our marriage, but he had never owned the property. It was an older home with 4 bedrooms, a large yard, and a converted carriage house behind it. The carriage house had a small bathroom, a kitchenette, and 1 open room. I used it as an office. Mark's family called it the guest house because that sounded better than the building where Sarah works and stores boxes. Patricia had always loved our property. Every birthday, barbecue, and Christmas dinner happened there because her house was smaller. Over time, she stopped referring to it as Sarah and Mark's house. She called it the family home. I used to think that was affectionate. After the affair, it sounded territorial. 1 week after Megan's role reassignment document, I received an email from Patricia. The subject line was, "Family reorganization proposal for discussion." There was no greeting. Only an attachment. It contained 17 slides. The first slide had a photograph of my house. Across it, in elegant blue lettering, were the words, "A compassionate path forward." The second slide was titled, "Current family challenges." It listed duplicated housing costs, fragmented grandchild access, emotional tension between Sarah and Claire, insufficient space at Claire's apartment, Mark's temporary residence at Patricia's home, underutilization of the guest house. I stared at that last line. Apparently, my office had become an underperforming asset. The next slide showed photographs of all 4 children. Lily, Owen, Noah, Ave. Underneath them, Patricia had written, "Children should not be punished for adult complexity." I agreed with that sentence. That was what made the presentation so manipulative. Patricia had built the entire proposal around the idea that refusing her plan would harm the children. Slide 5 showed her preferred living arrangement. Mark would return to the main house. Claire, Noah, and Ava would move in with him. Lily and Owen would remain in their bedrooms. And I would move into the carriage house. The slide described this as proximity without unnecessary emotional friction. I would have access to the main house for parenting responsibilities, meals, and scheduled family activities. Claire would oversee what Patricia called daytime household coordination. Mark would maintain financial responsibility for both households. Patricia would provide childcare support. The carriage house would be renovated to include a bed, a larger refrigerator, and privacy-enhancing window treatments. They had added curtains to my eviction plan. The next slide was titled, "Benefits to Sarah." I read that one twice. The benefits included reduced marital pressure, continued proximity to Lily and Owen, freedom from full-time household management, opportunity for emotional recovery, no immediate need to establish a separate residence, retention of limited access to the garden. The garden. At my house, I would retain limited access to my own garden. Another slide was called Optimal Grandchild Access and Family Unit Cohesion. According to Patricia's diagram, all 4 children could be raised as siblings while receiving daily support from Mark, Claire, and Patricia. I appeared on the chart as a dotted line. Beside my name were the words, "Supportive maternal presence, subject to emotional readiness." I had become a dotted line in my own children's lives. The proposal also included a weekly schedule. Monday and Wednesday dinners would be mandatory for everyone. Friday dinner would be for Mark, Claire, and the children. I could attend Friday dinner after a 3-month stabilization period. Sunday would be a rotating family day. The presentation ended with a slide titled, "What we need from Sarah." The first bullet point said, willingness to place children above pride. The second said, recognition that legal ownership does not always reflect moral ownership. And the third said, commitment to avoiding unnecessary legal action. That was the moment I understood this was not just Patricia being delusional. She knew the house belonged to me. She also knew I had spoken to an attorney. I called Mark. I asked whether he had seen the presentation. There was a long pause. Then he said he had seen an earlier version. I asked what had changed. He said the original version was more aggressive. Apparently, the presentation asking me to live behind my own house was the compassionate edit. I asked whether he had given his mother photographs of the carriage house. He admitted he had sent her the floor plan. I asked why. He said they were exploring every possible solution. I said, every solution where I disappear without you losing anything. He told me that was unfair. Mark said he had never agreed that Claire should replace me. He only believed all 4 children deserved stability. I asked why stability required Claire to live in my bedroom. He said nobody had assigned bedrooms yet. That answer told me they had discussed it. I ended the call. Then I opened Patricia's presentation and read it again. It was insulting, but it was also useful. It proved that Mark had been planning a future with Claire while telling me he wanted reconciliation. It proved that his family knew the house was mine. It proved they were pressuring me not to take legal action. I forwarded the presentation to my attorney. Then I created a presentation of my own. It contained 1 slide. The title was, Response to Family Reorganization Proposal. Underneath it I wrote, Proposal status rejected. Alternative arrangement. Mark may live with Claire. Patricia may provide unlimited grandchild access during Mark's parenting time. Megan may purchase matching pajamas for anyone she chooses. Sarah will remain inside Sarah's house. I emailed it to Patricia, Mark, and Megan. Patricia responded within 11 minutes. She said my sarcasm was disappointing. Megan said I was refusing to engage in good faith. Mark called 3 times. I did not answer. The following morning, I received a message from Claire. She said she had never seen Patricia's PowerPoint and had not agreed to move into my house. I believed her. Claire and I were not friends. She had participated in an affair with my husband for 18 months. But by that point, I understood that Mark had been lying to both of us. He had told Claire I was planning to move out. He had told me he wanted Claire out of his life except for necessary communication about Ava. He had told his mother he was trying to create one unified family. He was offering each woman a different future and waiting to see which arrangement cost him the least. Claire sent me screenshots from her conversations with Mark. In one message he wrote, Sarah will resist at first, but once she sees everyone supporting the plan, she'll understand that fighting it only isolates her. In another he wrote, the house is technically hers, but after 9 years she won't throw away the entire family structure. That sentence clarified everything. Mark did not believe I would forgive him. He believed I would surrender because leaving was inconvenient. 10 days later, he asked to speak with me in person. He said he wanted one final opportunity to present a solution without interference from his mother or sister. I agreed to meet him at the house after the children went to bed. I did not agree because I was considering reconciliation. I agreed because my attorney told me to remain calm, document everything, and avoid making decisions based only on second-hand messages. At 7:30 that evening, Mark arrived carrying his laptop. I should have known. Nobody in that family came to destroy your life empty-handed. And if a 17-slide plan to relocate someone into her own backyard sounds extreme, Mark was about to prove that his mother lacked imagination. Part 3: The Unified Household. Mark entered the kitchen and asked whether we could sit in the living room. He looked nervous but hopeful. He said he wanted me to listen to the entire proposal before reacting. I asked how long it was. He said about 20 minutes depending on discussion. I said so it's a presentation. He told me visual information would help prevent misunderstandings. Then he connected his laptop to the television. The first slide appeared. Unified household. A sustainable family model. There was a photograph of Mark standing between Claire and me. It was not a real photograph. He had taken separate pictures and placed us together. The editing was terrible. Claire and I were different sizes, standing under different lighting, while Mark smiled between us like the winner of a raffle nobody else had entered. I asked when he had made it. He said he had been working on it for several weeks. Several weeks meant before I learned about the affair. Mark began with what he called the core problem. According to him, traditional separation would produce 5 major losses. Reduced access to Lily and Owen. Reduced access to Ava. Financial strain across multiple households. Emotional damage to the children. Permanent hostility between me and Claire. I asked why permanent hostility between Claire and me was considered a major loss. He said it would make co-parenting difficult. I reminded him that Claire and I did not share children. He said we shared a family system. I wrote that phrase down. Mark noticed. He asked whether I was taking notes for my lawyer. I said please continue. The next slide showed all 4 children under a graphic of one roof. He said Lily and Owen already knew Noah from family gatherings. That was not true. They had met Noah twice, both times before I knew who Claire was. Mark had introduced Claire as a coworker going through a difficult divorce. Noah had been introduced as her son. Ava had not been present. According to Mark, living together would allow the children to develop secure sibling relationships. I asked whether Lily and Owen knew Ava was their sister. He said not yet. I asked when he planned to tell them. He said after the adults reached alignment. By adults he meant after I stopped objecting. The next slide was titled, Proposed Household Roles. Mark would be primary financial provider and family coordinator. Claire would be CHILDCARE and domestic operations lead. I would be financial administration, education and long-term planning lead. I asked why Claire's title sounded like a parent, while mine sounded like an unpaid accountant. Mark said the roles were based on our strengths. Claire worked part-time and enjoyed cooking. I handled the household finances, school enrollment, medical appointments, insurance paperwork, taxes, and savings. In other words, Claire would play with the children and make dinner. I would manage the labor nobody noticed. Mark would take credit for funding everything. I asked who would actually pay the mortgage. He reminded me there was no mortgage because the house was paid off. I asked who would pay the property taxes, maintenance, and insurance. He said those costs could continue coming from my account because they were property-related expenses. I said, so your plan is to move your girlfriend into my house while I pay to maintain it. He corrected me. Partner, he said. I asked whether he meant Claire was his partner. He said the terminology was still under discussion. Then came the bedroom slide. He had assigned Lily and Owen their existing rooms. Noah would take the guest bedroom. Ava would use the nursery that had once been Owen's room. Claire would use the primary bedroom. I would use the smaller bedroom across the hall. Mark had drawn arrows between the 2 rooms. I stared at them. He cleared his throat and explained that he would rotate bedrooms on a predictable schedule. 3 nights with me. 3 nights with Claire. Sunday would be flexible, depending on emotional and family needs. I asked whether he genuinely believed I would agree to share a husband on a schedule. He said he was not asking me to share him. He was asking both of us to recognize that the circumstances had evolved beyond conventional labels. I told him adultery was already a conventional label. He said language like that would make cooperation impossible. The next slide outlined relationship boundaries. Neither woman would criticize the other in front of the children. Neither woman would interfere with Mark's scheduled time with the other. Physical affection in shared spaces would remain moderate and respectful. New romantic partners would not be allowed. I asked why Mark could have 2 partners while Claire and I were forbidden from seeing anyone else. He said additional partners would destabilize the household. I laughed. Mark told me I was mocking a sincere attempt to prevent the children from losing their family. I asked which family he meant. The family he had with me. The family he created with Claire. Or the imaginary family where everyone waited peacefully for him to finish rotating bedrooms. He skipped to the next slide. It was titled, Financial EFFICNCIES. The proposal assumed my salary would continue going into our existing joint account. Mark's salary would also go into that account. Claire's income would cover her personal expenses and Noah's extracurricular activities. Shared funds would cover food, utilities, all 4 children, Ava's childcare, home repairs, and family travel. I asked whether Claire knew about this part. Mark said they had discussed general principles. I asked whether she knew her income would remain separate while mine supported the entire house. He said I was framing it negatively. Then I asked the obvious question. What happens if I say no? Mark closed his eyes briefly. Then he advanced to the conflict resolution flowchart. At the top was a box. Sarah raises concern. The chart divided into several possible paths. If Sarah's concern was emotional, Mark provides reassurance. Claire allows temporary space. Sarah attends individual counseling. Sarah concedes. If Sarah's concern was financial, Mark reviews household efficiencies. Patricia explains long-term family benefits. Sarah receives a 30-day adjustment period. Sarah concedes. If Sarah objected to bedroom rotation, Mark temporarily reduces transitions. The women attend mediation. Sarah concedes. If Sarah asked Claire to leave, the children's needs are reviewed. Patricia facilitates a family intervention. Sarah concedes. If Sarah threatened divorce, Mark reminded Sarah of the emotional impact on Lily and Owen. Megan provided information about cooperative family structures. Sarah received a 72-hour cooling-off period. Sarah concedes. Every branch ended in the same box. Sarah concedes. I asked Mark whether he had noticed that. He said the language was temporary. I asked who created the flowchart. He admitted Megan helped. I asked whether Patricia had seen the presentation. She had. I asked whether Claire had seen it. Mark said Claire had reviewed selected slides. I asked which slides she had not seen. He did not answer. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. Mark followed me. He said I had promised to hear the entire proposal. I said I had heard enough. He told me there were 6 slides left. I asked whether any of them ended with Mark conceding. He said that was not constructive. I opened a drawer and removed a folder. Inside were the documents my attorney had prepared. A petition for divorce. A proposed temporary parenting schedule. A complete record of the money Mark had transferred from our joint account to Claire. Copies of Megan's role reassignment document. Patricia's PowerPoint. Claire's screenshots. And a letter informing Mark that all future discussions about the house would go through legal counsel. Mark stared at the folder. He asked how long I had been preparing it. I said, since your sister demoted me. He told me not to make a permanent decision because of something Megan wrote. I said I wasn't leaving because of Megan's document. I wasn't leaving because of Patricia's presentation. I wasn't even leaving only because of the affair. I was leaving because every time Mark was given a chance to recognize what he had done, he created another plan where I absorbed the consequences. He kept his marriage. He kept Claire. He kept access to all the children. He kept my house. He kept my income. His mother received daily access to the grandchildren. His sister received the family structure she preferred. Claire received stability, housing, and a relationship with him. And I received a smaller bedroom, financial administration duties, and a flowchart telling me to surrender. Mark said he had only been trying to prevent everyone from suffering. I told him, no, you were trying to prevent yourself from suffering. He began crying. I wish I could say that gave me satisfaction. It didn't. I had loved him for almost a decade. Watching him cry still hurt. That was part of why I had waited so long to make a decision. Mark was not cruel every day. He had been a loving father in many ways. He had supported me through my mother's illness. He had held my hand when Owen needed surgery. He knew how I took my coffee and which songs Lily wanted at bedtime. That history was real. So was the betrayal. People sometimes act as though leaving becomes easy once someone has done something terrible enough. It doesn't. Sometimes the person who destroyed your trust is also the person you still instinctively want to comfort. I had to keep reminding myself that Mark's tears did not erase the hours he spent creating a bedroom rotation. He asked whether I had already filed. I said the documents would be filed the following morning. He asked whether he could remain in the guest house while we separated. I said no. He asked where he was supposed to go. I reminded him that Claire had an apartment. Mark said it was only 2 bedrooms. I said, then perhaps your mother can prepare a housing efficiency proposal. He called that cruel. Maybe it was. But I was tired of being the only person expected to behave gently while everyone else planned my removal. Mark packed the personal belongings he still had in the house. I did not change the locks while he was outside or throw his things into the yard. My attorney had warned me not to create unnecessary conflict. We agreed in writing on a date for him to collect the rest. After he finished, I asked him to remove his presentation from the television. He closed the laptop. Before he left, he said, "I really thought this could work." I said, "Of course you did, it gave you everything." The divorce was not instant. It was not clean. And it was not the triumphant movie ending people imagine. Mark initially argued that the money he transferred to Claire had been used to support Ava, which was partly true. My attorney separated the legitimate child support expenses from the hotel rooms, gifts, and other spending. We worked out a parenting schedule for Lily and Owen. Mark acknowledged Ava as their half-sister, and we arranged for the children to meet her gradually with professional guidance. I did not punish Ava for being born. I did not tell Lily and Owen that Claire had destroyed our family. Their father made choices. Claire made choices. Patricia and Megan made choices. The children did not. Claire and Mark moved in together for a while. From what I heard, the arrangement lasted less than 6 months. Claire had believed Mark would eventually create a normal household with her. She had not expected to become one rotating department inside a family corporation. When she realized Mark had shown me a plan that treated both women like assigned resources, she stopped viewing it as romantic. Patricia blamed me for the breakup. Megan sent one final email suggesting that my adversarial legal approach had destabilized the extended family. I did not respond. The matching Christmas pajamas arrived in family photographs that December. Claire was not wearing them. Neither was Mark. Patricia, Megan, and their children were the only ones in the picture. I spent Christmas morning in my house with Lily and Owen. We wore pajamas that did not match. We made pancakes, opened gifts, and watched an old movie in the living room. The house was quieter than it had been in years. At first, the silence felt like something missing. Then it began to feel like peace. Mark's entire conflict resolution flowchart ended with "Sarah concedes." He had created a box for counseling, a box for mediation, a box for family intervention, a box for a cooling-off period. But he never created a box for the one outcome he could not imagine. Sarah leaves, and Sarah keeps the house. That, my friends, is how one woman received 3 separate documents explaining why she should surrender her role, her home, and eventually her dignity. The sister-in-law tried to demote her. The mother-in-law tried to relocate her. And the husband tried to build an entire household where every disagreement ended with her giving in. In the end, the family did achieve one successful reorganization. Sarah removed herself from the position of wife who tolerates everything and promoted herself to woman who is finally done. And honestly, that was the only role reassignment in this story that made any sense. If you enjoyed this family PowerPoint disaster, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where controlling relatives discover that real life does not always follow their presentation slides. And let me know in the comments, which document was the worst? The sister-in-law's demotion notice, the mother-in-law's plan to take over Sarah's home, or the husband's conflict resolution flowchart where Sarah always conceded?